Evening, everybody. Early Merry Christmas. I haven't had the pleasure of making your acquaintance. My name is Mark Schmidt. I'm the executive director here. Thank you for coming tonight. We've never done this one before, so we're looking forward to it. First of all, I'd like to introduce our musicians, if you get a program. Could you give a round of applause for Jessica Rossiter and Stephanie Meaghan? Things, just if you've never been here before, across the way at our 1730 Conan House, we have an exhibit on Falmouth history as well as something that's kind of special. If you haven't seen it already, we have on loan, Karen Ronaldo has done a painting called The First Thanksgiving 1621. We invite you to see that. And can we also have a round of applause for Mr. Scorsese Pascal, who has put this together. So we have to Stephanie, take it from me.
Dancing bears, painted wings, things I almost remember, and a song someone sings once upon a December. Someone holds me safe and warm, horses prance through a silver storm, figures dancing gracefully across my memory. Far away, long ago, glowing dim as an ember, things my heart used to know, things it yearns to remember. And a song someone sings once upon a
Wishing you warmth and good cheer. Good evening. My name is Danielle Valesi. I'm a proud member of the board of directors for the Museums on the Green. Wishing you warmth and good cheer is one of the holiday expressions used in England, or so the modern internet tells us. Tonight, however, we're dialing our holiday time machine back to the England of the early 19th century. That is when Washington Irving, the father of the American short story, savored the holidays in the old country where his family's import-export business had taken him. Mr. Irving's 5 essays about Christmas in England were first published nearly 200 years ago, on January 1st, 1820. Their accounts of English holiday festivities and traditions are told from the perspective of a fictional English gentleman named Geoffrey Crayon. Washington Irving is far better known for 2 other works, Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Those short stories and his 5 Christmas essays were published as installments in the sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gentleman. It made Mr. Irving a literary celebrity on both sides of the Atlantic. Our program tonight, An Olde Country Christmas, features excerpts from the Washington Irving essays which you may discover still strike familiar chords today. Our cast includes Falmouth residents with backgrounds in theater, education, broadcasting, church and community leadership, poetry, nonfiction writing, publishing, music, and commerce. They all possess a love for our language, literature, music, and our collective history. Stephanie Miele, is punctuating our program with songs of the season. She is accompanied by Jennifer Rossiter. Our 6 readers are, in order of presentation, the Reverend Will Mebane Jr., Carol Casey, Miele, Meaghan Quinn, Dan Tritle, and Annie Hart. Enjoy an Olde Country Christmas and that you all experience warmth and good cheer during these holidays. Thank you.
Christmas, Part 1. Nothing in England exercises a more delightful spell over my imagination than the lingerings of the holiday customs and rural games of former times. They recall the pictures my fancy used to draw in the May morning of life, when as yet I only knew the world through books, and believed it to be all that poets had painted it. And they bring with them the flavor of those honest days of yore, in which perhaps with equal fallacy, I am apt to think the world was more homebred, social, and joyous than at present. I regret to say that they are daily growing more and more faint, being gradually worn away by time, but still more obliterated by modern fashion. They resemble those picturesque morsels of Gothic architecture which we see crumbling in various parts of the country, partly dilapidated by waste of ages, and partly lost in the additions and alterations of latter days. Poetry, however, clings with cherishing fondness about the rural game and holiday revel, from which it has derived so many of its themes. As the ivy winds its rich foliage about the Gothic arch and bouldering tower, gratefully repaying their support by clasping together their tottering remains and, as it were, embalming them in verdure. Of all the festivals, however, that of Christmas awakens the strongest and most heartfelt associations. There is a tone of solemn and sacred feeling that blends with our conviviality and lifts the spirit to a state of hallowed and elevated enjoyment. The services of the church about this season are extremely tender and inspiring. They dwell on the beautiful story of the origin of our faith and the pastoral scenes that accompanied its announcement. They gradually increase in fervor and pathos during the season of Advent, until they break forth in jubilee on the morning that brought peace and goodwill to men. I do not know a grander effect of music on the moral feelings than to hear the full choir and the pealing organ performing a Christmas anthem in a cathedral and filling every part of the vast pile with triumphant harmony. It is a beautiful arrangement, also derived from days of yore, that this festival, which commemorates the announcement of the religion of peace and love, has been made the season for gathering together of family connections and drawing closer again those bands of kindred hearts, which the cares and pleasures and sorrows of the world are continually operating to cast loose. Of calling back the children of a family who have launched forth in life and wandered widely asunder, once more to assemble about the fraternal hearth that rallying place of the affections, there to grow young and loving again among the endearing mementos of childhood. There is something in the very season of the year that gives a charm to the festivity of Christmas. At other times, we derive a great portion of our pleasures from the mere beauties of nature. Our feelings sally forth and dissipate themselves over the sunny landscape, and we live abroad and everywhere. The song of the bird, the murmur of the stream, the breathing fragrance of spring, the soft voluptuousness of summer, the golden pomp of autumn, earth with its mantle of refreshing green, and heaven with its deep, delicious blue, and its cloudy magnificence, all fill us with but exquisite delight, and we revel in the luxury of mere sensation. But in the depths of winter, when nature lies despoiled of every charm, and wrapped in her shroud of sheeted snow, we turn for our gratification to moral sources. The dreariness and desolation of the landscape, the short gloomy days and darksome nights, while they circumscribe our wanderings, shut in our feelings also from rambling abroad, and make us more keenly disposed for the pleasures of the social circle. Our thoughts are more concentrated, our friendly sympathies more aroused. We feel more sensibly the charm of each other's society, and are brought more closely together by dependence on each other for enjoyment. Heart calleth upon heart, and we draw our pleasures from the deep wells of living kindness which lie in the quiet recesses of our bosoms, and which, when resorted to, furnish forth a pure element of domestic felicity. The pitchy gloom without makes the heart dilate on entering the room filled with the glow and warmth of the evening fire. The ruddy blaze diffuses an artificial summer and sunshine through the room, and lights up each countenance into a kindlier welcome. Where does the honest face of hospitality expand into a broader and more cordial smile? Where is the shy glance of love more sweetly eloquent than by the winter fireside? And as the hollow blast of wintry wind rushes through the hall, clasps the distant door, whistles about the casement, and rumbles down the chimney, what can be more grateful than that feeling of sober and sheltered security with which we look round upon the comfortable chamber and the scene of domestic hilarity?
Christmas, Part 2. The English, from the great prevalence of rural habits throughout every class of society, have always been fond of those festivals and holidays which agreeably interrupt the stillness of country life. And they were in former days particularly observant of the religious and social rites of Christmas. It's inspiring to read even the dry details which some antiquaries have given of the quaint humors, the burlesque pageants, the complete abandonment to mirth and good fellowship with which this festival was celebrated. It seemed to throw open every door and unlock every heart. It brought the peasant and the peer together and blended all ranks into one warm, generous flow of joy and kindness. The old halls of castles and manor houses resounded with the harp and the Christmas carol, and their ample boards groaned under the weight of hospitality. Even the poorest cottage welcomed the festive season with green decorations of bay and holly. The cheerful fire glanced its rays through the lattice, inviting the passenger to raise the latch and join the gossip knot huddled around the hearth, beguiling the long evening with legendary jokes and oft-told Christmas tales. One of the least pleasing effects of modern refinement is the havoc it has made among the hearty old holiday customs. It has completely taken off the sharp touchings and spirited reliefs of these embellishments of life and has worn down society into a more smooth and polished, but certainly a less characteristic surface. Many of the games and ceremonials of Christmas have entirely disappeared, and like the sheriff's sack of old Falstaff, are become matters of speculation and dispute among commentators. They flourished in times full of spirit and lustihood, when men enjoyed life roughly, but heartily and vigorously. Times wild and picturesque, which have furnished poetry with its richest materials, and the drama with its most attractive variety of characters and manners. The world has become more worldly. There's more dissipation and less of enjoyment. Pleasure has expanded into a broader but shallower stream and has forsaken many of those deep and quiet channels where it flowed sweetly through the calm bosom of domestic life. Society has acquired a more enlightened and elegant tone, but it's lost many of its strong local peculiarities, its homebred feelings, its honest fireside delights. The traditionary customs of golden-hearted antiquity, its feudal hospitalities and lordly wassailings, have passed away with the baronial castles and stately manor houses in which they were celebrated. They comported with the shadowy hall, the great oaken gallery, and the tapestried parlor, but were unfitted to the light, showy saloons and gay drawing rooms of the modern villa. Shorn, however, as it is of its ancient and festive honors, Christmas is still a period of delightful excitement in England. It's gratifying to see that home feeling completely aroused, which holds so powerful a place in every English bosom. The preparations making on every side for the social board that is again to unite friends and kindred, the presence of good cheer passing and repassing, those tokens of regard and quickeners of kind feelings, the evergreens distributed about houses and churches, emblems of peace and gladness. All these have the most pleasing effect in producing fond associations and kindling benevolent sympathies. Even the sound of the strolling minstrels, the waits, rude as may be their minstrelsy, breaks upon the mid-watches of a winter night with the effect of perfect harmony. As I have been awakened by them in that still and solemn hour when deep sleep falleth upon man, I've listened with hushed delight, and connecting them with the sacred and joyous occasion, have almost fancied them into another celestial choir, announcing peace and goodwill to men. The scene of early love again rises green to the memory beyond the sterile waste of years, and the idea of home, fraught with the fragrance of home-dwelling joys, reanimates the drooping spirit, as the Arabian breeze will sometimes waft the freshness of the distant fields to the weary pilgrim of the desert. Amidst the general call to happiness, the bustle of the spirits and stir of affections which prevail at this period, what bosom can remain insensible? It is indeed the season of regenerated feeling, the season for kindling not merely the fire of hospitality in the hall, but the genial flame of charity in the heart.
glow. Memories of other days come tumbling from the past to remind us, like the seasons do, that life goes by so fast. The winter lays her fingers cold on dark and lonely nights, but Christmas it will soon be here to brighten up the light. When the summer comes and the bells ring out, it is such a joyous sound to hear them echo in the trees that are green the whole year round. Green the whole year round. Green the whole year round. The holly yew and the ivy tree are green the whole year round.
Christmas Eve. It was a brilliant moonlight night, but extremely cold. Our chaise whirled rapidly over the frozen ground. The postboy cracked his whip incessantly, and a part of the time his horses were upon a gallop. "He knows where he is going," said my companion, Master Simon, laughing, "and is eager to arrive in time for some of the merriment and good cheer of the servants' hall. My father, you must know, is a bigoted devotee of the old school and prides himself upon keeping up something of old English hospitality. He is a strenuous advocate for the revival of the old rural games and holiday observances, and is deeply read in the writers, ancient and modern, who have treated of the subject." The family meeting was warm and affectionate. As the evening was far advanced, the squire would not permit us to change our traveling dresses, but ushered us at once to the company, which was assembled in a large old-fashioned hall. It was composed of different branches of a numerous family connection, where there were the usual proportions of old uncles and aunts, comfortable married dames, superannuated spinsters, blooming country cousins, half-fledged striplings, and bright-eyed boarding school hodens. They were variously occupied, some at a round game of cards, others conversing around the fireplace. At one end of the hall was a group of your folks, some nearly grown up, others of a more tender and budding age, fully engrossed by a merry game. And a profusion of wooden horses, penny trumpets, and tattered dolls about the floor showed traces of a troop of little fairy beings, who, having frolicked through a happy day, had been carried off to slumber through a peaceful night. The grate had been removed from the wide, overwhelming fireplace to make way for a fire of wood, in the midst of which was an enormous log, glowing and blazing, sending forth a vast volume of light and heat. This, I understood, was the Yule clog, which the squire was particular in having brought in and illumined on a Christmas Eve, according to ancient custom. There was an emanation from the Hart in genuine hospitality, which cannot be described, but is immediately felt and puts the stranger at once at his ease. I had not been seated many minutes by the comfortable hearth of the worthy old cavalier before I found myself as much at home as if I had been one of the family. Supper was announced shortly after our arrival. It was served up in a spacious oaken chamber, the panels of which shone with wax, and around which were several family portraits decorated with holly and ivy. Besides the accustomed lights, 2 great wax tapers, called Christmas candles, wreathed with greens, were placed in a highly polished buffet among the family plate. I was happy to find my old friend, minced pie, in the retinue of the feast, and finding him to be perfectly orthodox and that I need not be ashamed of my predilection. I greeted him with all the warmth wherewith we usually greet an old and very genteel acquaintance. The supper disposed everyone to gaiety, and an old harper was summoned from the servants' hall, where he had been strumming all the evening, and to all appearance comforting himself with some of the squire's home brewed. The dance, like most dancers after supper, was a merry one. Some of the older folks joined in, and the squire himself figured down several couple with a partner with whom he affirmed he had danced at every Christmas for nearly half a century. The most interesting couple in the dance was a young officer and a ward of the squire's, a beautiful blushing girl of 17. From several shy glances which I had noticed in the course of the evening, I suspected there was a little kindness growing up between them. And indeed, the young soldier was just the hero to captivate a romantic girl. He was tall, slender, and handsome, and like most British officers of late years, had picked up various small accomplishments on the continent. He could talk French and Italian, draw landscapes, sing very tolerably, dance divinely. But above all, he had been wounded at Waterloo. What girl of 17, well read in poetry and romance, could resist such a mirror of chivalry and perfection? The party broke up for the night with the kind-hearted old custom of shaking hands. As I passed through the hall on my way to my chamber, the dying embers of the Yule clog still sent forth a dusky glow, and had it not been for the season, with no spirits stir abroad, I should have been half tempted to steal from my room at midnight and peep whether the fairies might not be their revels dancing about the hearth.
Christmas Day, Part 1. When I awoke the next morning, it seemed as if all the events of the preceding evening had been a dream, and nothing but the identity of the ancient chamber convinced me of the reality. While I lay musing on my pillow, I heard the sound of little feet pattering outside of the door, and a whispering consultation. Presently, a choir of small voices chanted forth an old Christmas carol, the burden of which was, "Rejoice! Our Savior, he was born on Christmas Day in the morning." I rose softly, slipped on my clothes, opened the door suddenly, and beheld one of the most beautiful little fairy groups that a painter could imagine. It consisted of a boy and two girls, the eldest not more than 6, and as lovely as seraphs. They were going the rounds of the house and singing at every chamber door, but my sudden appearance frightened them into mute bashfulness. They remained for a moment playing on with their lips at their fingers, and now and then stealing a shy glance from under their eyebrows until, as if by one impulse, they scampered away, and as they turned an angle of the gallery, I heard them laughing in triumph at their escape. I had scarce dressed myself when a servant appeared to invite me to family prayers. He showed me the way to a small chapel in the old wing of the house, where I found the principal part of the family already assembled in a kind of gallery, furnished with cushions, hassocks, and large prayer books. The servants were seated on benches below. The old squire read prayers from a desk in front of the gallery, and I must do him justice to say that he acquitted himself with great gravity and decorum. Our breakfast consisted of what the squire denominated true old English fare. He indulged me in some bitter lamentations over modern breakfasts of tea and toast, which he censured as among the causes of modern effeminacy and weak nerves, and the decline of old English heartiness. And though he admitted them to his table to suit the palates of his guests, Yet there was a brave display of cold meats, wine, and ale on the sideboard. After breakfast, I walked about the grounds with Master Simon and another gentleman named Frank Bracebridge. We were escorted by a number of gentleman-like dogs that seemed loungers about the establishment, from the frisking spaniel to the steady old stag hound, the last of which was a race that had been in the family time out of mind. They were all obedient to a dog whistle, which hung at Master Simon's buttonhole, and in the midst of their gambols would glance an eye occasionally upon a small switch which he carried in his hand. There appeared to be an unusual number of peacocks about the place, and I was making some remarks upon which I termed a flock of them that were basking under a sunny wall. I was told that, when I was gently corrected in my phraseology, and I was told, according to the most ancient and approved treatise on hunting, I must say a muster of peacocks. In the same way, my friend advised me with a slight air of pedantry that we say a flight of doves or swallows, a bevy of quails, a herd of deer, of wrens or cranes, a skulk of foxes, or a building of rooks. He went on to inform me that, according to Sir Anthony Fitzherbert, we ought to ascribe this bird both understanding and glory, for being praised he will presently set up his tail, chiefly against the sun, to the intent you may the better behold the beauty thereof. But at the fall of the leaf, when his tail falleth, he will mourn and hide himself in corners, till his tail come again as it was. I could not help smiling at this small display of erudition on so whimsical a subject, but I found that the peacocks were birds of some consequence at the Hall. For Mr. Bracebridge informed me that they were great favorites with his father, who was extremely careful to keep up this breed, partly because they belonged to chivalry and were in great request at the stately banquets of the olden time, and partly because they had a pomp and a magnificence about them, highly becoming an old family mansion. Nothing, he was accustomed to say, had an air of greater state and dignity than a peacock perched upon an antique stone balustrade.
This song is from the musical Scrooge, which is based on A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It is sung at the end when Scrooge has been visited by the three spirits. Ebenezer Scrooge is transformed, and in the immortal words of Tiny Tim, God bless us everyone. Full of darkness, all the darkness of my heart. At my door, a world in need of kindness, from man's kindness I departed. All the hours and days and years I've wasted, all the love and joy I never tasted, all the errors of the past replaced with something strange. Give me time to change. I can see a future full of beauty, and my spirit starts to fly. I can change the world, yes, it's my duty. God forgive me, let me try. I'll spend my fortune on the ones who need me. Oh, where kindness and my conscience lead me. Give my heart and soul to all. God speed me on my way. And to God I pray. Let me live the lessons of the Spirit. Let the stars in the sky remind us of man's compassion. Let us love till we die, and God bless us everyone. Let the stars in the sky remind me of my compassion. Let me love till I die, and God bless us everyone. Let me love till I die, and God bless us everyone.
Christmas Day, Part 2. While we were talking, we heard the distant toll of the village bell, and I was told that the squire was a little particular in having his household at church on Christmas morning, considering it a day of pouring out thanks and rejoicing. As old Tusser observed, "At Christmas be merry, and thankful withal, and feast thy poor neighbors, the great with the small." As the morning, though frosty, was remarkably fine and clear, the most of the family walked to the church, which was a very old building of gray stone, and stood near a village, about half a mile from the park gates. I had expected to see a sleek, well-conditioned pastor, such as is often found in a snug living in the vicinity of a rich patron's table, but I was disappointed. The parson was a little, meager, black-looking man with a grizzled wig that was too wide and stood off from each ear so that his head seemed to have shrunk away within it, like a drilled filbert in its shell. He wore a rusty coat with great skirts and pockets that would have held the church Bible and prayer book, and his small legs seemed still smaller from being planted in large shoes decorated with enormous buckles. I was informed that the parson had been a chum of the squire's at Oxford and had received his living shortly after the latter had come to his estate. The worthy parson lived but within times past and knew but little of the present. On reaching the church porch, we found him rebuking the gray-haired sexton for having used mistletoe among the greens with which the church was decorated. It was, he declared, an unholy plant, profaned by having been used by the Druids in their mystic ceremonies. And though it might be innocently employed in the festive ornamenting of halls and kitchens, yet it had been deemed by the fathers of the church as unhallowed and totally unfit for sacred purposes. So tenacious was he on this point that the poor sexton was obliged to strip down a great part of the humble trophies of his taste before the parson would consent to enter upon the service of the day. The parson gave us a most erudite sermon on the rites and ceremonies of Christmas and the propriety of observing it, not merely as a day of thanksgiving, but of rejoicing, supporting the correctness of his opinions by the earliest usages of the church, and enforcing them by the authorities of Theophilus of Caesarea, St. Cyprian, St. Chrostotom, St. Augustine, and a cloud more of saints and fathers from whom he made copious quotations. I was a little at a loss to perceive the necessity of such a mighty array of forces to maintain a point which no one present seemed inclined to dispute. But I soon found that the good man had a legion of ideal adversaries to contend with, having, in the course of his researches in the subject of Christmas, got completely embroiled in the sectarian controversies of the Revolution, when the Puritans made such a fierce assault upon the ceremonies of the church, and poor old Christmas was driven out of the land by proclamation of Parliament. He forgot that nearly 2 centuries had elapsed since the fiery persecution of poor mince pie throughout the land, when plum porridge was denounced as mere popery, and roast beef as anti-Christian, and that Christmas had been brought in again triumphantly with the merry court of King Charles at the Restoration. The parson kindled into warmth with the ardor of his contest and the host of imaginary foes with whom he had to combat, had a stubborn conflict with old Piern and 2 or 3 other forgotten champions of the Roundheads on the subject of Christian festivity, and concluded by urging his hearers, in the most solemn and affecting manner, to stand to the traditionary customs of their fathers and feast and make merry on this joyful anniversary of the church. I have seldom known a sermon attended apparently with more immediate effects, for on leaving the church, the congregation seemed one and all possessed with the gaiety of the Spirit so earnestly enjoined by their pastor. The elder folks gathered in knots in the churchyard, greeting and shaking hands, and the children ran about crying, "Ule, ule," and repeating some uncouth rhymes, which the parson, who had joined us, informed me had been handed down from days of yore. The villagers doffed their hats to the squire as he passed, giving him the good wishes of the season. With every appearance of heartfelt sincerity, and were invited by him to the hall to take something to keep out of the cold of the weather, and I heard blessings uttered by several of the poor, which convinced me that, in the midst of his enjoyments, the worthy old cavalier had not forgotten the true Christmas virtue of charity.
I was loitering in the library when a distant thwacking sound, I was informed, was a signal for serving up of dinner. The squire kept up old customs in the kitchen as well as hall, and the rolling pin struck upon the dresser by the cook summoned the servants to carry in the meats. The dinner was served up in the great hall, where the squire always held his Christmas banquet. A blazing, crackling fire of logs had been heaped onto a warm and spacious apartment, and the flame went sparkling and wreathing up the wide-mouthed chimney. We were ushered into this banqueting scene with the sound of minstrelsy, the old harper being seated on a stool beside the fireplace, the twanging his instrument with vast deal more power than melody. Never did Christmas board display a more goodly and gracious assemblage of countenances. Those who were not handsome were at least happy. And happiness is a rare form of improver of a favored visage. I always consider an old English family as well worth studying as a collection of Holbein's portraits or Albert Durer's prints. There is much antiquarian lore to be acquired from much knowledge of the physiognomies of former times. Perhaps it may be from having continually before their eyes those rows of old family portraits, which the mansions of this country are stocked. Certain it is that the quaint features of antiquity are often most faithfully perpetuated in those ancient lines. And I have traced an old family nose through a whole picture gallery, legitimately handed down from generation to generation, almost from the time of the conquest. Something of the kind was to be observed in the worthy company around me. Many of their faces had evidently
originated in the Gothic age and then merely copied by succeeding generations. And there was one little girl in particular, of staid demeanor, with a high Roman nose and an antique vinegar aspect, who was a great favorite of the squire's and the very counterpart of one of his ancestors who figured in the high court of Henry VII. The table was literally loaded with good cheer and presented an epitome of country abundance in the season of overflowing larders. A distinguished post was allotted to the ancient sirloin, as my host termed it, being, as he added, the standard of old English hospitality, and a joint of goodly presence, and full of expectation. There were several dishes quaintly decorated, in which evidently something traditionary in their embellishments, but about which I did not like to appear over-curious, so I asked no questions. The butler brought in a huge silver vessel of rare and curious workmanship, which he placed before the squire. Its appearance was hailed with acclamation, being the wassail bowl, so renowned at Christmas festivity. The contents had been prepared by the squire himself, for it was a beverage of skillful mixture, of which he particularly prided himself, alleging that it was too abstruse and complex for the comprehension of an ordinary servant. It was a potation indeed that might make the heart of a toper leap within him, being composed of the richest and raciest of wines, highly spiced and sweetened, with roasted apples bobbing about the surface. The old gentleman's whole countenance beamed with a serene look on indwelling delight as he stirred the mighty bowl, having raised it to his lips with a hearty wish of Merry Christmas to all. He sent it brimming round the board for everyone to follow his example, according to primitive style, pronouncing it the ancient fountain of good feeling where all hearts meet together. Much of the conversation during dinner turned upon family topics to which I was a stranger. There was, however, a great deal of rallying of my friend, Master Simon, about some gay widow of which he was accused of having a flirtation. This attack was commenced by the ladies, but it was continued throughout dinner by a fat-headed old gentleman next to the parson, with a persevering assiduity of a slow hound, being one of those long-winded jokers who, though rather dull at the starting game, are unrivaled for their talents of hunting it down. Master Simon, indeed, seemed fond of being teased on the subject, as old bachelors are apt to be, and he took occasion to inform me, in an undertone, the lady in question was a prodigiously fine woman, and drove her own curricle. The dinner time passed away in this flow of innocent hilarity, and though the old hall may have resounded in its time with many a scene of broader rout and revel, yet I doubt whether it ever witnessed more honest and genuine enjoyment. How easy it is for one benevolent being, such as the squire, to diffuse pleasure around him, and how truly is a kind heart a fountain of gladness, making everything in its vicinity to freshen into smiles.
Judy Garland originated the song Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas in the 1944 film Meet Me in St. Louis. This takes place in 1904 And the family has just discovered that the father is going to have a new job, and they're all excited when they hear the news until they realize that it is going to have to cause them to have to move to New York and before the World's Fair of 1904. So this is terrible news. They're very distraught. The song takes place on Christmas Eve, and Judy Garland's character, Esther, is supposed to cheer up her little sister, Tootie, 5 years old, played by Margaret O'Brien. The lyrics that she was originally given were not the lyrics that we know. The original lyrics are these. Have yourself a merry little Christmas, it may be your last. Next year we may all be living in the past. Have yourself a merry little Christmas, pop that champagne cork. Next year we may all be living in New York. No good times like the olden days, happy golden days of yore. Faithful friends who were dear to us will be near to us no more. But at least we all will be together if the Lord allows. From now on, we'll have to muddle through somehow. So, have yourself a merry little Christmas now. Judy Garland and Tom Drake, who played the boy next door, and the director, Vincent Minnelli, went to the composers, Hugh Martin and Ralph Blaine, and said, she can't sing this to me, 5 years old. She's just going to burst out into hysterics. And so they convinced him, with some difficulty, or convinced them to change the lyrics. So from 1944 to 1957, the new lyrics were sung, except for the line about having to muddle through somehow. That stayed. But in 1957, Frank Sinatra wanted to make an album called A Jolly Christmas. And so he went to the composers and said, this is a jolly Christmas. Don't you think we can jolly up that line? And so they did, and we have the line about hanging your star from the highest bough. So have yourself a merry little Christmas now. Christmas future is far away. Christmas past is past. Christmas present is here today, bringing joy that will last. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. Let your heart be light. From now on, the troubles will be out of sight. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. Let your heart be gay. From now on, the troubles will be miles away. Here we are as in olden days, happy golden days of yore. Faithful friends who are dear to us, gather near to us once more. Through the years we all will be together if the fates allow. Hang a shining star upon the highest bough, and have yourself a merry little Christmas now.
And that concludes our program. On behalf of the Falmouth Historical Society and Museums on the Green, I would like to thank everyone who worked to make tonight's event happen. Thanks to our volunteers, most of whom are members of our board of directors, for greeting and preparing the refreshments you'll enjoy in a few minutes. Special thanks to Diana and David Broussard, our understudies, who made themselves familiar with all the readings in case they had to stand in for one of our readers. Diana and David, will you please stand up? Thanks again to our own Bob Haskell. Bob and worked diligently to coordinate tonight's readings, and musicians and selected our readings, so this wouldn't happen without him, so thank you very much. Thank you to Washington Irving, the father of American literature, for leaving us with such beautiful prose and for reminding us of the spirit of the holidays. And a heartfelt thank you to the accomplished people from Falmouth who presented this program. To our singer, Stephanie Miele, and to Jennifer Rossiter, who accompanied Stephanie on the keyboard. Stephanie and Jennifer. And finally, to our 6 readers. Please stand if you are